May I speak in the name of the Father, the Son. Well, I have to admit that so he's the only writer in the New Testament. So he tends to, and he includes in his gospel, they were selective person. And then he accompanied what happened at Jesus' birth. John, Jesus told, and Transfiguration, about the role of women in Jesus. He says quite a lot about Mary Magdalene. But a fundamental thing about the Gospel of Luke is that it's universal. It speaks about not just the Jews and what the Jews did, but about the wider community, about Gentiles as well. So Jesus, in Luke's Gospel, doesn't make a distinction between Jew and Gentile. In fact, he praises the non-Jew. So it's interesting, isn't it, that only in Luke do we have the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan who looks after someone who is injured, who has been robbed. The Samaritan who looks after this injured person when the rabbis and the priests, the holy people, the Jews, didn't do it. He also has people speaking with approval about those who were not Jews. In our house group, we've looked at the widow of Zarephath that Elijah stayed with. She was not a Jew, she was a Syrian. He also commands Naaman, who was a leper, who came to Israel to seek healing. There was plenty of lepers in Israel, Luke comments, but it's only Naaman who came, a non-Jew. Luke in Acts has the Roman centurion showing greater faith than the Jews. So it's very much a gospel that looks at those on the outside. If you like, you can look at Luke as concentrating on those on the periphery, not those at the centre of things, but those who are outside of that. So he's very much interested in the poor. It's fascinating when you compare the same bit in different Gospels, and it's worth doing. So the Beatitudes we're very familiar with. Matthew says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Luke says, "Blessed are you poor." So there's a great emphasis on the poor rather than just spiritual. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, the one up the tree, is only in Luke. So he's on the edge, he's an outcast, he's a tax collector, and Jesus draws him in. So what things can we learn from Luke and his Gospel and Acts? I think first that Luke very much wanted to know for himself. He spoke to people. He investigated. He got facts together. He starts his Gospel by saying, I've investigated all these things. Our faith is not based on hearsay, it's based on facts. It's a historic faith. And it's a faith that needs to be shared with others to draw them in as well. And we can have confidence that what we read, particularly in Luke, are events that happened, and we can share those with others. Luke focuses on those on the edge. The poor, the widow, the orphan, the lepers, the outcast, the sinners. As Christians, we shouldn't equate a person's worth by how much they earn, by their economic usefulness, but how much they're worth in God's eyes. I used to say to my students, how do you measure how good a society is? And I used to say, to me, it's how well it treats people who have no economic value, no economic usefulness. Those who, if you like, draw on the resources of the society, the poor, the sick, the dying. So today we're focusing our worship on those who are not here, who maybe can't connect with us. Maybe because they're too afraid to come out, maybe they find it difficult to come out. Perhaps they don't have access to the internet, or find it difficult to watch something over the internet or to phone in. They are maybe finding meaning through the TV and radio. But we know that people with limited contact with others become lonely, can become distressed. That reading from 2 Timothy was very interesting, wasn't it? Because it starts with what you might say the theological bit, but gets very personal at the end. So we learned that Paul wants some scrolls brought for him, doesn't he? And a cloak and things like that. But we also see in that passage that Paul experienced loneliness in prison. He felt abandoned by many, and he lists people who had departed from him because if you like, they couldn't cope with the imprisonment or had better things to do. And he says, only Luke is with me. Loneliness can be very difficult. We feel abandoned, that nobody cares. But we can keep in touch with people by phoning them, by sending them cards, by assuring them that they are not forgotten, that they do matter. It can be simple things like, as we pass their house, waving to them, or perhaps trying to chat through the window. Luke emphasised prayer in his gospel, and at this time we need to pray not only for ourselves but others, for those we have not seen as well as those we have. So let us commit ourselves to lift before God those we have not seen, those whom we're wondering how they are. There will be an opportunity later to pray for somebody. Perhaps someone will come to mind and we can lift them in prayer and share that burden of loneliness, of feeling forgotten, lifting them before God and praying that God would be present with them, that they would know his presence and therefore feel held. Amen.